The studio lights flicker. The audience settles into an almost eerie silence. Bill Maher, sitting confidently behind his desk, leans into the microphone, his face a mask of controlled smugness. The tension in the air is thick, palpable. He pauses, for just a moment long enough for the weight of the words he's about to say to hang in the balance. "Now, folks, you have to admit," Maher begins, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "If we're being honest, things were a whole lot better when we were all just, well, a little more white around here." A murmur ripples through the crowd. A few chuckles. Some uneasy shifting in seats, but nothing that screams outrage. He presses on, a grin spreading across his face. "Sure, you can call it history, you can call it whatever you want. But let's face it, America was built by people who didn't have to worry about diversity in every corner of life. I mean, don't you miss the good old days?" The camera zooms in for a close-up, capturing every inch of Maher's grin. Every tilt of his head as if daring anyone to challenge him. The atmosphere is electric, with a strange mix of disbelief and the perverse enjoyment Maher gets from poking the bear. He knows this will get a reaction, and just as he's about to drop his punchline, the sound of a chair scraping against the floor slices through the tension. The audience stirs. Representative Jasmine Crockett, seated across the stage, stands abruptly, her eyes wide with fury, her fists clenched at her sides. "You didn't just say that?" she snaps, her voice steady, but carrying an undeniable weight of anger. The room holds its breath. The audience is suddenly divided, some frozen in shock, others clearly waiting for the fireworks. The camera shifts between Maher and Crockett. The contrast between their expressions, his smirk and hers, full of disbelief, heightening the tension. Maher's cocky demeanor falters for a split second. A shift, barely noticeable, but enough to show that he didn't expect the direct confrontation. The silence is deafening, but then Crockett's voice breaks through the quiet like a sword. Cutting through the air, "You have no idea what you're messing with, Bill." A beat of silence. Then the low rumble of the audience begins to growl like the distant roar of thunder before the storm. What happens next changes everything. The room is still buzzing with the echoes of Crockett's challenge. But this moment isn't just about one man's casual slip of the tongue. No, this is about the larger, more insidious thread running through the heart of American discourse: race, identity, and the uneasy balancing act between tradition and progress. Bill Maher's remark wasn't a joke. It wasn't a passing comment. It was the sharp-edged reflection of a prevailing sentiment in some corners of the country. Sentiment that nostalgia for a time when things were better has become the currency of a dangerous political narrative. A narrative that, for all its gloss of common sense, is rooted in exclusion, fear, and the denial of America's evolving identity. And Crockett, she's seen it all before. She knows the ground she's standing on is precarious. Because while Maher may speak to a niche of affluent liberals and late-night TV watchers, the ramifications of his words ripple far beyond the shiny walls of Hollywood studios. His slip of the tongue plays into a deeper, much older story that runs through the veins of the nation. The myth that the good old days were better because they were easier, because the system is burdened by the complexities of diversity. The lie that somehow, America was more unified when voices of color were muted or dismissed. But what Maher and those who believe like him don't seem to realize is that this isn't a battle of nostalgia. It's a battle for legitimacy. The legitimacy of the communities who have fought tooth and nail to be seen, heard, and respected in a society that has, for too long, denied them both. It's a battle for the future of a nation that can no longer afford to pretend that its history, its institutions, and its identity aren't in desperate need of rethinking. This isn't just about Crockett taking a stand for a single moment of political theater. No, this is about the very real, very personal stakes that come with every racist comment dressed up as humor or tradition. It's about the communities that will bear the brunt of this rhetoric, the black and brown Americans, who have spent centuries being told they're less than, who have seen their lives treated as collateral in the endless war for America's old soul. And Crockett knows that if this isn't addressed, if this moment passes without consequence, it will embolden the Mahers of the world to keep making these flippant, dangerous comments. Will tell the millions of Americans who feel marginalized that their struggles don't matter, that their voices don't count, and that their fight for justice is just another political stunt. But Crockett isn't here for that. She's here to show Bill Maher and the millions who may share his views that this moment is bigger than one conversation. This is about the soul of the country. It's a story of a nation that was built on the backs of enslaved people, a nation that prides itself on freedom and equality. It constantly struggles to walk the walk when it comes to the messy reality of a multicultural society. As Maher chuckles, perhaps unaware of the power his words hold, Crockett locks eyes with him. Her gaze is unyielding, her stance one of quiet defiance. She takes a breath, because in that breath, she carries the weight of every immigrant who crossed the border in search of a better life. Every African American who fought through systemic oppression, every marginalized group who has been told they don't belong, and this is her moment to push back. Do you know what happens when we let people like you get away with this, Bill? She asks, her voice unwavering, the weight of history behind every word. You don't just hurt people, you hurt this country. You hurt what we're trying to build. The room falls silent, and for the first time, Maher's smug expression falters. He isn't laughing now. Crockett isn't just defending a political ideology, she's defending the future of America. And this is just the beginning. Bill Maher's career is built on one simple, yet profoundly dangerous principle: shock value. For over 3 decades, he's made a name for himself by testing the limits of what can be said on television, using his biting humor to dissect everything from politics to religion. But while his sharp tongue and satirical wit have earned him accolades, they've also earned him a reputation as one of the most controversial figures in American media. Born in New York in 1956, Maher came up in the world of comedy in the 1980s, a time when the boundaries of what could be said on stage were constantly being pushed. He was a young, ambitious comedian trying to carve his niche in a sea of sharp-witted performers. It didn't take long for him to distinguish himself with a comedic style that was equal parts insightful and caustic. His sharp criticism of societal norms and conventions made him a star on the stand-up circuit. And soon enough, Maher became the host of Politically Incorrect, a late-night talk show known for its freewheeling discussions on hot-button topics. It was on this stage, a forum where no topic was off-limits, that Maher first began to use his platform to air his more controversial views. The show's tagline, "It's politically incorrect, deal with it," was more than just a slogan. It was Maher's rallying cry, and in many ways, it worked. He had a massive following, a dedicated audience that appreciated his irreverence and his ability to call out what he saw as political correctness gone awry. But as Maher's popularity grew, so did the frequency of his offensive remarks, especially those concerning race, identity, and religion. In 2001, Maher made one of the most infamous statements of his career. Following the 9/11 attacks, Maher famously said, "We have been the cowards. Lobbing cruise missiles from 2,000 miles away, that's easy. But you can't beat the enemy that way. We need to go to war with them. But we won't, because we are cowards." This remark, which came on the heels of one of the darkest days in American history, sent shockwaves through the nation. Advertisers pulled out of Politically Incorrect, and Maher was fired from his own show. For many, this was the beginning of his evolution, from a provocateur to a symbol of someone whose lack of restraint had gone too far. But that wasn't the end of his career. In 2003, Maher returned to television with Real Time with Bill Maher, a show that offered a more politically charged version of the talk show format. And it was here, in the fertile ground of live television and endless political commentary, that Maher's contentious views on race began to crystallize. For years, Maher has made jokes at the expense of racial minorities, immigrant communities, and anyone he deems to be part of what he calls the liberal overreach. His style of humor often teeters dangerously close to reinforcing stereotypes, trivializing the struggles of marginalized groups under the guise of satire. Take, for example, his repeated use of racial slurs in the context of his jokes. In 2017, Maher used the N-word while interviewing Nebraska Senator Ben Sasse, a remark that quickly sparked backlash. Maher's defense? He was simply making a joke. But that justification rings hollow when you consider the context. Maher, a wealthy, white man, using a word with a centuries-old history of oppression to make light of the struggles of Black Americans. His deflection of the issue, dismissing it as comedy, only fueled the fire. It was a stark example of how Maher, in his quest to remain relevant in an increasingly polarized media landscape, chose to lean into racial insensitivity instead of evolving. But this wasn't an isolated incident. Maher has repeatedly found himself in hot water over his comments on race, often framing his critiques of movements like Black Lives Matter in the context of liberal overreaction and identity politics. His refusal to acknowledge the systemic racism that runs through the very institutions he critiques shows just how deeply entrenched his views are. For Maher, it's not about confronting uncomfortable truths. It's about maintaining the status quo, mocking those who dare to challenge it. His approach to race is also steeped in an underlying belief that America's past, specifically the legacy of slavery and segregation, shouldn't be something that's dwelled on. This perspective came to the forefront in 2016 when Maher made a joke about the race card, suggesting that it was a tactic used by people of color to manipulate the system. His glib dismissal of the real, lived experiences of Black Americans trying to fight for equality has been a constant thread throughout his career, but Maher's most damaging trait as an antagonist lies in his inability, or perhaps unwillingness, to engage with the complexities of race in America. He thrives on conflict and controversy, but seldom takes the time to actually understand the full weight of his words. He is a man who has spent decades entertaining his audience with reckless abandon, but when it comes to the conversation on race, his glib humor often rings hollow. And now, in front of a national audience, Maher has crossed a line he's danced on for years. His comment wasn't just a misstep. It was an embodiment of everything that is wrong with the dismissive attitudes toward race in this country. His comment wasn't funny. It was dangerous. For Representative Jasmine Crockett, this is where the stakes get personal. Because for her, it's not just a joke, it's a message. A message that, for all of Maher's wit and supposed intellect, he still hasn't learned the most important lesson. You can't laugh at the marginalized and expect to walk away unscathed. Rep. Jasmine Crockett is not a product of Washington. She is not an establishment politician, nor is she someone who grew up in the lap of privilege. No, her rise to prominence is a testament to resilience, determination, and a fierce commitment to justice. She is the kind of leader who does not wait for the world to change around her. She charges forward, unapologetically, demanding that it bend to the will of those who have long been ignored and oppressed. Born and raised in Dallas, Texas, Crockett's childhood was marked by struggle, but also by an unwavering sense of purpose. Her parents, both hardworking individuals who faced the day-to-day hardships of raising a family in a community riddled with systemic inequities, instilled in her the values of service, sacrifice, and the relentless pursuit of a better world. The Crockett household wasn't filled with luxury or ease, but it was rich in love, strength, and the understanding that the fight for justice was not just a political cause, it was a moral one. Crockett's political awakening came early. As a young woman, she witnessed the devastating effects of inequality firsthand, how communities of color were routinely denied access to quality education, healthcare, and basic economic opportunities. But it wasn't just the inequalities she set was the dismissive attitudes toward those who dared to challenge them. She realized that, in the eyes of many, people like her, people from her background, were often viewed as less than, as burdens on a system that refused to see them as equals. By the time she entered college, Crockett was already determined to make a difference. She pursued her undergraduate studies with a focus on political science, understanding that if she wanted to change the system, she had to understand how it worked. She quickly earned a reputation for being outspoken, for being the student who was unafraid to challenge her professors, her peers, and even the very foundations of the American political system. It was in the classrooms of historically Black colleges and universities, where voices like hers were amplified, that Crockett began to find her footing as a passionate advocate for civil rights. After graduating, Crockett took a step many in her position would have avoided. she entered the world of criminal defense. As a public defender, she represented individuals, mostly black men and women, who had been failed by the very system that was supposed to protect them. For Crockett, it wasn't just a job, it was a calling. She fought for the rights of the voiceless, often up against a powerful system that saw her clients as expendable. She became a fierce advocate for the underdog, taking on cases where others might have seen only lost causes. But it wasn't long before Crockett realized that her fight for justice didn't end in the courtroom. The system that had failed her. Clients wasn't just a legal one, it was political. Laws were being made, policies were being passed, decisions were being made in places where people like her were excluded from the conversation. If she truly wanted to change things, she needed to go to the source. And so, Crockett made the decision that would forever alter the course of her life. She entered politics. Her campaign for state representative was not a typical one. Crockett didn't have the connections or the backing of powerful political figures. She didn't have the campaign funds that other candidates relied on to get their message out. But what she did have was the power of the people behind her people, who were tired of being ignored. People who were fed up with the status quo, people who had long been denied a seat at the table. Crockett's grassroots approach resonated with voters, and her message, centered on equality, justice, and representation, for all, struck a chord with the very people who had been left behind by the system for so long. When she won her seat, Crockett didn't just enter politics to play the game. She entered to change it. From the moment she took office, she began making waves. She was unapologetically outspoken, consistently pushing for policies that addressed racial disparities, criminal justice reform, and economic justice. Her reputation as a fierce advocate for marginalized communities quickly spread beyond Texas. And soon enough, she was not just a local politician, but a rising star in the broader movement for racial and social justice. But it was Crockett's fearless confrontation of power that truly set her apart. Time and time again, she stood up to those who tried to silence her, whether it was fellow politicians who dismissed her calls for reform, media figures who painted her as an extremist, or corporate interests that sought to maintain the status quo. She didn't just disagree with the system, she challenged it. And that's what made her a target in Washington. Crockett's voice became a beacon for those who had long been overlooked in the political conversation. She refused to let issues like police brutality, voter suppression, and economic inequality be swept under the rug. She wasn't afraid to take on the establishment, to stand toe-to-toe with the most powerful figures in the country and demand change. It wasn't long before her name became synonymous with the fight for racial justice and equal rights. Crockett's reputation as someone who doesn't back down from a fight is well-earned. Her calm demeanor, coupled with her sharp intellect and unshakable resolve, make her a formidable presence. But what truly sets her apart is her authenticity. She doesn't speak from a place of privilege. She speaks from a place of lived experience. She knows what it's like to struggle. And she spent her entire career making sure that no one else has to go through the same. This is why, when she stands up to Bill Maher, it's not just a political mob, it's a moment of personal reckoning. Crockett is not just fighting for political power. She's fighting for the dignity of her people, for the recognition of their struggles, for the promise that America can be a place where everyone, no matter their race, background, or status, has the right to thrive. In that moment on the stage, as Maher dismisses the very people she represents, Crockett isn't just defending herself. She's defending every single person who has ever been made to feel small, to feel inferior, to feel unworthy of respect. And she won't back down, not this time. The tension in the studio has shifted from electric to unbearable. Representative Jasmine Crockett's challenge hangs in the air, thick with anticipation.
Oh.
Bill Maher, momentarily caught off guard, tries to regain his composure. The smirk he wore earlier is now replaced with a hint of uncertainty. He leans forward, looking directly at Crockett, as if to brush off the weight of her words with the casualness that has defined his entire career. "Really?" he asks, his voice dripping with condescension. "You're offended by a joke? Is that where we're at now? You can't take a little humor?" The studio audience shifts uncomfortably. Maher's attempt to downplay the moment, to laugh it off as just another part of his edgy persona, falls flat. His words land with a sickening thud, like an insult dressed as a laugh track. Crockett doesn't flinch. Instead, she steps forward, her posture straight. Her eyes locked onto his with the force of someone who's been through the fire, knows how to stand tall in the heat. "I don't need you to tell me what's funny. Bill," she says, her voice cool but filled with an undeniable fire. "And it's not about your so-called humor. It's about the people. You've been laughing at the people you've been dismissing. You can laugh at them all you want, but that doesn't make it any less wrong." The audience is quiet now, captivated by the clash. They're no longer divided by who's laughing, but by who's listening and who's speaking truth. Maher raises an eyebrow, still attempting to wield his usual air of superiority. He tilts, his head searching for some opening, some way to discredit her in front of millions. But Crockett is prepared for this. She's been in the trenches, seen the same tired rhetoric recycled time and time again. And she knows this moment is a test of conviction, of resolve. "Bill, let me make something clear for you," she continues, her voice cutting through the tension. "When you reduce an entire group of people, an entire community, to a punchline, you're not being funny. You're being harmful. You're perpetuating the same stereotypes that have held us back for centuries. That's what you're doing, whether you realize it or not." Maher scoffs, his patience thinning. "Come on, Jasmine," he says, his tone a little sharper now. "I'm not some bigot. I'm just pointing out the obvious. Maybe if people didn't get so offended over everything, we could have a real conversation. But no, it's always about playing the race card, isn't it?" The words land like a slap to the face. Crockett's eyes narrow, her jaw tightening, but she doesn't lose her composure. She takes a deep breath, steadying herself, and then she steps closer to the edge of the stage, her voice ringing out clear and unwavering. "You don't get to tell me when to be offended, Bill," she says, her words sharp and deliberate. "You don't get to tell me when my pain, my history, and the history of my people is worth standing up for. You don't get to laugh it off. You don't get to call it a race card. Because let me tell you something, this isn't a game. This is life. This is survival. And if you're going to sit here in front of millions of people and pretend that what you say doesn't matter, then you've got another thing coming." There's a long beat of silence. The room feels like it's holding its breath, waiting for Maher's response, but he's faltering now. The audience, sensing the shift in power, leans in, waiting for the next exchange. Maher's usual retort is gone, replaced with a subtle edge of defensiveness. He opens his mouth, but this time his words come slower, more measured. "I didn't mean it like that," he begins, but Crockett interrupts him, her voice like steel. "No," she says firmly, "you didn't mean it. But that's the problem. You don't have to mean it to do harm. Your words matter because they're amplified. They're heard by millions who look up to you and think that because you say it, it must be true. It's not true, Bill. It's dangerous." Maher shifts, uncomfortably in his seat, and for the first time, the cracks in his carefully constructed persona are visible. Crockett has gotten under his skin, and he knows it. The smugness he's clung to for so long is beginning to slip away, replaced by a faint sense of unease. The crowd, once split, is now entirely on edge. Some are nodding in agreement, while others remain silent, unsure of what to make of the rising tension. "But I'm just saying," Maher tries again, but this time his voice lacks its usual conviction. "People can't go around being offended by everything. It's the world we live in." "No, Bill," Crockett fires back, her voice unwavering. "It's the world you live in. You get to say what you want, and when you're called out for it, you get to play the victim. But for people like me, like so many others, the stakes are higher. The consequences are real. You don't get to make jokes about us without expecting some kind of response." The weight of her words lingers in the air, heavy and undeniable. There's no easy comeback now. Maher stares at her, the smugness gone, replaced with something far more uncertain. For the first time, he's not the one controlling the narrative. But just as the tension reaches its peak, Crockett stands tall, her voice a final, forceful declaration. "I'm not here to play games, Bill. I'm here to hold you accountable." And that's what we all need to do. Hold each other accountable. The studio is silent now, the moment hanging in the air like a charged electric current. The crowd holds its breath, but the battle is far from over. The tension in the room is almost unbearable. The audience now divided into two camps, waits with bated breath. Maher, for the first time in the debate, seems rattled. His usual sharp tongue falters as he struggles to regain his footing, but it's clear the ground is shifting beneath him. He's no longer the self-assured provocateur in control. Rep. Jasmine Crockett has turned the tables, and now the stage is set for her ultimate moment of reckoning. Crockett doesn't flinch. She stands tall, her gaze never wavering from Maher. The room is so quiet you could hear a pin drop. But she knows. This is her moment. This is where she takes everything that has been building up to this point and delivers it with the force of 1,000 voices. She doesn't need to shout. She doesn't need to raise her voice. She simply needs to speak the truth with unwavering confidence. "You think this is just about words, Bill?" Crockett begins, her voice steady but cutting through the silence like a blade. "You think your flippant comments, your so-called jokes are harmless? That they're just part of the comedy routine? Well, let me tell you something what you say. It's not just a joke. It's a weapon for people like you who've never had to fear for their lives, their safety, or their future. It might just seem like a harmless quip. But for the rest of us people who look like me, people who are black, people who are immigrants, people who don't have the luxury of stepping out of this system of inequality, your words hit like a hammer." She pauses, letting the weight of her words sink in. Maher opens his mouth to interrupt, but she cuts him off with a sharp gesture, commanding the room's attention. Her eyes, filled with a fire that has been burning for years, lock onto his. "No, Bill, let me finish," she continues, her tone unyielding. "You've spent years laughing at people like me. You've spent years dismissing our pain as if it's some kind of joke that's only funny to people like you. But the thing is, Bill, it's not funny anymore. You've built a career on making fun of those who've been systematically oppressed, who've been told their voices don't matter, who've been beaten down by a system that was never designed to serve them. And you get on TV and you make jokes about it, you call it comedy? But I'm here to tell you what you're doing, Bill, isn't just comedy, it's complicity." The room is dead silent. Maher, whose arrogance had once been a shield, now looks unsure. He shifts in his seat, clearly rattled by the force of Crockett's words. But Crockett is just getting started. "You say you're not a bigot?" she presses, her voice rising, the room hanging on every word. "You say you're just calling it like it is? But let me ask you this. How many times have you been told that your life doesn't matter? How many times have you been stopped by the police just because of the color of your skin? How many times have you walked into a room and felt the weight of being the only person who looks like you, who speaks like you, who comes from where you come from? You don't get to talk about calling it like it is until you've lived that life, until you've been on the receiving end of that hate, till you've seen firsthand what it feels like to be treated as less than simply because of who you are. And that, Bill, is where your privilege blinds you. You have no idea what it's like. And yet you feel entitled to make jokes about it." The audience stirs, a murmur running through the crowd. Crockett's words have struck a chord. Maher, for the first time, seems visibly uncomfortable, his usual retorts and comebacks nowhere to be found. But Crockett presses on, her voice now carrying the weight of her convictions, the weight of every injustice she's ever witnessed, every injustice she's ever fought against. "I've been in the trenches, Bill," she says, her tone now softer, but filled with the undeniable strength of someone who's seen the worst of the world and still stood tall. "I've seen the faces of the people who are told they don't matter. I've sat in courtrooms defending people who were treated like criminals for simply existing. I've been on the front lines of the fight for justice, and let me tell you, Bill, it's not easy, but it's necessary. Because the moment we stop standing up, the moment we stop calling out the lies, the moment we let people like you dictate the conversation, we lose everything. We lose our dignity. We lose our rights. We lose our humanity." She lets that last word hang in the air. The room is silent again, but this time, it's not because they're waiting for a punchline. It's because they understand the weight of what she's saying. "And let me tell you something else." Bill Crockett continues, her voice now full of quiet power. "When you stand on that stage and you make jokes about people like me, about people who fought for their rights, you're not just making fun of the pain we are talking about real lives, real people who don't have the luxury of laughing it off. What you're doing is dangerous. It's feeding into a system that wants us to stay quiet, that wants us to stay in our place, We're not going to stay in our place anymore. The room seems to breathe in unison, the weight of her words washing over them. Crockett has shifted the conversation. She's not just defending herself, she's defending every person who has ever been silenced. Every person who has ever been told they don't belong. She's standing up not just for racial justice, but for the dignity of the human spirit. Bill Maher, the man who once controlled the narrative, now finds himself out of words. He opens his mouth to respond, but the usual bravado is gone. The audience knows it. Crockett knows it. And in that moment, everyone in that room understands. The power of what just happened? Crockett's eyes never leave Maher's. There's no smug grin now, no deflection. Just the quiet, unyielding strength of someone who has fought too hard. For too long to be silenced. "I'm not here for your approval, Bill," she says. Her final words a clear, firm declaration. "I'm here for the truth." A silence. That follows is deafening. And in that silence, the shift is undeniable. The debate between Bill Maher and Representative Jasmine Crockett reverberates far beyond the confines of the studio. What had started as a political confrontation quickly transforms into a national spectacle. The moment Crockett called Maher, out dismantling his argument with a force and clarity that left no room for rebuttal, has sparked a firestorm of reactions. Across social media, news outlets, and the political landscape. The shockwaves of the debate are felt everywhere, and the fallout from Maher is swift and unforgiving. Within hours, Twitter is ablaze. Hashtags like #CrockettWins and #MaherExposed trend across the platform. Supporters of Crockett flood the social media space with posts praising her fearless defense of marginalized communities. Memes of her powerful rebuttal spread like wildfire, with many sharing clips of her mic drop moment. She didn't just take him down, one viral tweet reads, "She made him realize how deep the problem really goes." But the praise for Crockett isn't just from her loyal base, it's coming from unexpected places. Civil rights organizations, activists, and celebrities take to their platforms to publicly commend her bravery. "The courage to speak truth to power is rare," writes one prominent civil rights leader in a statement shared widely across social media. Representative Jasmine Crockett didn't just defend herself, she defended all of us. She's a force for justice. Meanwhile, Maher's supporters are nowhere near as vocal. In the past, his controversial comments would have sparked fierce debate, with some rallying around him as a defender of free speech, but this time, the tide is different. His fan base, while still sizable, is caught in a swirl of discomfort. His defenders have become increasingly quiet. Hesitant to respond to the mounting backlash, the media too begins to take sides. Major news outlets, from the New York Times to the Washington Post, publish editorials and op-eds analyzing the debate. Some defend Maher, claiming his remarks were simply meant as a joke taken out of context.
Others, however,
argued that Crockett's response was not only justified but necessary. "This wasn't just a debate about race," reads a prominent op-ed. "It was about the growing realization that we can no longer afford to let casual racism and thoughtless commentary pass unchecked." Representative Crockett's words cut through the noise, challenging us to look at the deeper implications of Maher's humor or lack thereof. But it's the political figures who react in the most telling ways. Democrats rallied behind Crockett, using her takedown of Maher as a rallying cry for their progressive values. Many see her as a rising star in the party, a new kind of leader, unafraid to take on the status quo. In contrast, Maher's liberal allies, those who had once looked past his controversial remarks because of his so-called anti-PC stance, begin to feel the heat. The debate serves as a mirror to the shifting dynamics in American politics, where the progressive wing is becoming less tolerant of the type of flippant commentary Maher has built his career on. Senator Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, one of the loudest voices in the progressive wing, tweets, "This is what accountability looks like. We need more leaders like Jasmine Crockett who are willing to take on the entrenched systems of power with unapologetic truth." The political establishment can no longer ignore the ramifications of Maher's comments. In the days following the debate, calls for him to apologize begin to gain momentum. Several influential figures in the entertainment industry, many of whom had previously supported Maher's right to free speech, now find themselves grappling with the reality of what his words represent. What former guest of his show, an actor known for his advocacy for racial justice, publicly states, "I can no longer remain silent. Bill's words are a betrayal of everything we fought for." In stark contrast, Crockett's supporters are vocal, unapologetic, and relentless. Her constituents in Texas are thrilled, seeing her as a powerful force who doesn't back down from the fight. "She's standing up for us," says one constituent. "She's not just a representative, she's a fighter. We need more people like her in Congress." But it's not just the political world that's reacting. It's the entertainment industry often, a microcosm of America's more progressive inclinations, is also reeling. Late-night talk shows, which Maher once dominated, now find themselves navigating the fallout. Stephen Colbert, who had once called Maher a peer, subtly distances himself from his approach. Jimmy Kimmel, too, shifts the conversation, using his monologue to discuss how humor can perpetuate harmful stereotypes, while still affirming the power of laughter as a force for good. But the backlash isn't just confined to the professional realm. Maher's own friends begin to question his approach. It's a turning point for someone who had once been seen as a sharp critic of political correctness. He finds himself isolated in a way he hasn't experienced before. It's not just the media or his fans, it's his peers, the people who once saw him as a truth-teller. Now they're wondering if his brand of edgy humor has gone too far in the midst of the storm. Crockett remains steadfast. She doesn't gloat. She doesn't revel in the chaos she's helped create. Instead, she continues to focus on the message. This is about accountability, not personal gain. Fight is not about one man or one remark. It's about the larger conversation surrounding race, privilege, and the power structures that continue to hold marginalized communities down. If this moment can spark real change, Crockett says in a televised interview, if it can push us as a country to have a deeper conversation about how we treat each other, then I'll consider it a victory. The fallout for Maher continues to escalate. Calls for boycotts of his show gain traction. Meanwhile, Crockett's political capital grows by the day. Her bravery has made her a hero in the eyes of many, and her message resonates louder than ever. For Bill Maher, this moment may mark the beginning of the end of his once untouchable status. For Representative Jasmine Crockett, however, it's just the beginning. The stage is set for a new kind of political discourse, one that doesn't tolerate harmful jokes, that demands accountability, and that celebrates the voices of those who've been silenced for far too long. The echoes of that debate between Bill Maher and Representative Jasmine Crockett will linger long after the studio lights dimmed. But the true impact of what transpired goes far beyond the spectacle of that confrontation. It's about something deeper, a shift in the collective consciousness that could alter the way we think, speak, and act when it comes to race, justice, and accountability in the weeks that followed. People from all walks of life, politicians, activists, everyday citizens, began to reflect on the true weight of the exchange. And it became abundantly clear this wasn't just about two figures going head-to-head. It was about the courage to stand up, to confront the uncomfortable truths we often try to avoid, and to demand that society do better. What Crockett demonstrated in that debate was the power of confronting injustice head-on. She didn't back down when Maher, with all his privilege and platform, tried to diminish the struggles of those who have been systematically oppressed. She didn't flinch when he attempted to trivialize the fight for racial equality using his so-called comedy as a shield. Instead, she called him out for what he was, a man who had used his words, its influence to perpetuate a system that thrives on the very inequities, claimed to laugh off. But the real lesson here isn't just about exposing the flaws of a powerful figure. The lesson is in the courage it takes to call out those who perpetuate harm, even when the odds seem stacked against you. Crockett's willingness to speak truth to power is what makes her not just a political figure, but a symbol of something much larger. A movement that is challenging us to face the uncomfortable realities we so often overlook. For too long, we've allowed harmful rhetoric to slide by. We've allowed comments, whether made in jest or not, to perpetuate stereotypes and reinforce the status quo. We've let the people in power dictate what's acceptable and what's not, often at the expense of marginalized communities who have been silenced for far too long. But Crockett's stance in that debate made one thing crystal clear: can no longer afford to remain silent. The exchange wasn't just a political debate, it was a call to action. It was an invitation for us to look at the world around us and ask ourselves, what are we tolerating that we shouldn't? What are we allowing to go unchecked because it's easier than confronting it? It challenged us to reevaluate the way we engage with issues of race, privilege, and justice. Asked us to question the idea that humor should ever come at the expense of human dignity. For Maher, it was a wake-up call. For years, he'd built his brand on the belief that his position in society afforded him the luxury to joke about anything, to push any boundary, and to brush off criticism as a matter of free speech. Crockett's words exposed was that free speech is not the same as free consequences. Words have power. They can uplift or tear down. They can heal or harm. And when those words are used to perpetuate harm, they must be challenged. The real power of Crockett's rebuttal wasn't just in what she said, but in the way she reframed the conversation. She took what could have been a dismissible moment, a fleeting comment made by someone who thought they were above reproach, and turned it into a teachable moment. A moment where the world watched as a leader of conviction stood up and said, "Enough." And that's the real victory here. It wasn't just the moral satisfaction of taking down an opponent in a public debate. It was the knowledge that in that moment, Crockett became the voice of millions of people who've had enough of being silenced, enough of being dismissed, enough of being made the punchline of someone else's joke. This moment is about more than one confrontation. It's about a nation grappling with its own identity, who it is, who it has been, and who it aspires to become. We are at a crossroads, one where we must decide whether we continue to allow ourselves to be complacent in the face of injustice, or whether we have the courage to speak out, to call out those who perpetuate harm, and to create a future that honors the dignity of all people, no matter their race, background, or identity. The lesson from that debate is simple. Accountability matters. Words matter. And when those words are used to tear people down, it's up to all of us, every single one of us, to stand up and say, "This ends now." Representative Jasmine Crockett's words resonate far beyond that debate stage. They are a rallying cry for justice, a reminder that we must never stop fighting for what's right. Her courage to take on the powerful forces that seek to maintain the status quo serves as a beacon for all who feel powerless. A testament to the fact that one voice, one person, standing up for truth can change the course of history. And so, the question is not whether Crockett won that debate. The real question is, will we, as a society, take the lessons of that moment and use them to build a better, more just world? Will we have the courage to stand up when it matters most? Because the truth is this: we are all responsible for the future we create, and it's up to us to ensure it's one where justice, dignity, and respect for all people are at the forefront. The fight isn't over. It's only just begun. And there you have it, the unforgettable moment when accountability was demanded, when truth was spoken, and when one woman stood up to take on not just a man, but an entire system that has for too long dismissed the voices of those fighting for justice. Representative Jasmine Crockett showed us all what it means to confront power head-on, to challenge harmful rhetoric, and to fight for a future where dignity triumphs over division. This moment wasn't just a political showdown, it was a call to action, a reminder that words matter, that the fight for racial justice is far from over, and that we all have a role to play in shaping the future of this country. We can no longer remain silent in the face of injustice, and we must continue to hold those in power accountable, no matter who they are. Now, it's your turn. What do you think about the debate between Bill Maher and Representative Jasmine Crockett? How can we as a society move forward and ensure that voices like hers aren't silenced? We want to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below. Let's continue the conversation. Let's keep pushing for the change we know is possible. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe for more powerful stories like this one. Stay informed, stay engaged, and join us as we continue to shine a light on the truth, one conversation at a time. Your voice matters. Don't just watch, be part of the movement.